for now. Okay, so you've learned about those tricky pawns. Let's move on now. Let's talk about the bishop. All right, can you say bishop? The bishop uh, is a really powerful piece. He's like the advisor to the king and the queen. This guy sits right next to the king, and when the queen is on the board, she's right there next to him. He's right there next to the king and the queen. They're sort of the advisors to that committee. So the white ones line up on C1 and F1, and the dark ones line up on F8 and C8. You got it. The bishop moves in a diagonal motion. Okay, so even though white has two bishops, the white has a dark bishop and a light bishop. Now, see, they're both the white bishops, but the reason that they're called the dark bishop and the light bishop is because they start out on either light square or a dark square, and they stay on the dark squares for the entire game, right? Black also has a dark squared bishop and a light squared bishop. So if this guy starts out on light squares, he's going to always be on light squares. He's never going to land on dark squares. And conversely, this guy is always going to be on dark squares. So if you look up on your game and your opponent's bishops are both on light squares, something has gone terribly, terribly wrong, right? There's been some kind of breaking of the rule. There's been a bad move. Somebody's done something illegally, because you're always supposed to have one bishop on dark and one on a light square. Okay? Unless you've got a passed pawn and he chooses to go onto a dark square and you've already got a dark square bishop. Okay? Good. So you remember that from the last lesson. But let's get started with these guys. These bishops are pretty simple guys, right? They move diagonally, but they're trapped behind these pawns, man. They can't jump over these pawns, and so they can't even get into the game unless those pawns move out of the way. So this is a good move. So that E pawn moving up to E4 is usually a good starting move, and so black likes that move, and so he'll copy him. What that does is that opens up some space for our bishops to travel. The bishop travels in a diagonal movement. He can go all the way across this board. He can move. That's a good move for the white bishop, and this bishop, this dark bishop, he can move out too. So he can move all the way over here if he wants to. And the next time this bishop moves, hey, he can move all the way over to this side. And if it's black's move, this bishop, hey, he can take diagonally. So this pawn right here is in his way, he could go right over here and he can take that pawn. And if white says, hey, you just took my pawn, I'm going to come down here and take your pawn, he can move just like that. So these guys move in a diagonal motion all the way across the board, right? Now, of course, they can't take their own piece, so they just have to stop at their pieces, right? Well, let's see if we can get these other bishops into the game too. So we're going to move this guy up, and we're going to move this guy up, and we're going to see if we can move this one across the board, and maybe we can use this guy and we can move him across the board. Now let's take a look at this position. You've got some pieces in play. If it's black's turn to move, can you see what might be a good move for black to make? Yeah, this dark bishop, he could take that pawn, right? He could take that piece. But look at here. This pawn has said, hey, man, you just took my buddy, and you're diagonal from me. So this pawn, he could take that bishop. Yes, sir, he can take that bishop right away. And that's right, that pawn, he could take that bishop. He's sitting right there in his way. He can take him diagonally, or he can move forward, but that pawn lives for the opportunity to take a bishop. Absolutely. And so you can see the moving options of the bishop and the power of the pawn. Now, look at what just happened. This bishop has moved all the way over here close to this king. In this position, white would say check, because he's threatening. Remember, he's threatening to take the king in the next move. So he's saying, hey, in my next move, I could take the king. but you have to give a warning. You have to say, hey, buddy, I could take you on your next move, so you better move him, you better take me, or you better block this check, right? Now, this king doesn't have anything to block with, and he could run if he wanted to, but the king is saying, hey, man, you just walked all over it. He just going to talk to me like that in my own kingdom? No, you can't do that. The king says, you're close enough for me to take you back. And so the king can capture a piece that is very close to him like that. Okay? All right, so we practiced this bishop a little bit. I want you to practice a little, but we're going to move on to the next piece.